look at it, it's nice to point that out. Also, our author quotes Amos 8:11. It says, "Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord God, that I will send a famine on the land, and not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord." What was he talking about? Years of silence, right? There won't be a prophet. So there will be no words from the Lord during this time. He doesn't identify the time, but then we see the table over on the right, and of course, where we finish, we're already under Persia's control. So let's see, kind of how it happens. The Greeks are in charge for quite a while, aren't they? They got the land from around 334, 323, and 63 is when Rome came along. Okay, let's see here. I have a confession. I had kind of a difficult time getting all my notes together in my mind, and so I had to write it out in more detail. So I may be reading my notes more than reciting them, but that's okay. Stan read a sermon dismissed.
I don't think you're going to get any judgment from any of us. There's very few of us that can do what you've done with all that knowledge.
Oh no, that's my memory is like a colander. But it has been. I really have enjoyed this class. It's been a lot of very interesting information, and years of silence are interesting too. Now, this is 400 years. Can you imagine 400 years ago from right now, we were in a nation, right? What year was it? 1625? It's 150 years before Independence Day. So that's a real long time. So this was a long time for them as well. Okay. We ended with Malachi 4:4-6. Would anybody like to read that? The last few verses of the Old Testament. Huh?
Remember the law of Moses, my servant, which I commanded him in Horeb for all Israel, with the statutes and judgments. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord, and he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse.
Okay, so he's going to send Elijah, right? So thus begins, at that point, this 400-year period of silence. Micah also says something similar. Someone would like to turn to Micah and read chapter 3, verses 6-7.
You said?
Yes, sir.
Therefore you shall have night without vision, and you shall have darkness without divination. The sun shall go down on the prophets, and the day shall be dark for them. So the seers shall be ashamed, and the diviners abashed. Indeed, they shall all cover their lips, for there is no answer from God.
Okay, now these are prophecies of the years of silence, but we've actually got a Jewish writing that comes from about 150 BC. It's from 1 Maccabees, chapter 9, verse 27. And the writer, whoever it was, said, "Speaking of a time of distress, such as had not been seen since the time that prophets ceased to appear among them." So this writer experienced personally that there had been nothing for him for at least 250 years before him. So these years of silence begin with Malachi at about 430 when it begins, to John the Baptist when he starts, which is AD 26. And you know, we could actually argue, it's the silence we're talking about, right? We're not talking about the old law, because he actually was a prophet under the old law, wasn't John the Baptist. Okay? But Scripture, especially Daniel, we're going to be looking at Daniel's song. So turn over there. Shows that even though God is quiet, there's not any prophecy, that God would be very active providentially, right? By shaping history, the empires that they encounter, and even culture. Now, Daniel 2, we're familiar with, because we discussed that in an earlier class, right? Can someone review the statue vision that Nebuchadnezzar had? Big, tall man.
Statue had a head of gold, had a upper body of silver, lower body, bronze, and iron, and clay mixed with iron, I don't know,
It's very close. Yeah. So the head is Babylon, right? The shoulders and the arms are who? Persia. Got two arms. What does that mean? The Medes and the Persians. Never thought of that before. Somebody pointed it out in my readings. And then you've got the belly and the thighs. Who's that? Greece. And then, of course, the legs and the feet mixed with clay is Rome. That's who all this legs. So those four, isn't it? All right. Daniel 8, and the reason we're looking at these is because these prophecies are giving the children of Israel a glimpse as to what's going to happen during these years. And when they happen, if they've been faithful to the Word and been keeping up with it and reading, and I would hope that Daniel would be available to them, because he was very early, wasn't he, when he wrote his book? Then they would be looking for this. So if we look at Daniel chapter 8, let's read it and see if you can guess, if you don't already know, what might be talking about, all right? So Daniel says, I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the bank of the canal. It had two horns, and one horn was high, but one was higher than the other. And the higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased and became great. And as I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. This is ESV, so that's why it sounds like that. He came to the ram with the two horns which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him in his powerful wrath. I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him and struck the ram and broke his two horns. Okay. Somebody, does any of this sound familiar yet? What this might be talking about?
You know, Persians getting attacked by Greece.
Yes. Yes. The two horns are the Medes and the Persians, right? And the goat with the one horn, who's the one horn? Alexander the Great, right? Does that sound about right? Yes, indeed. And so, and did you catch the directions? They prophesied the directions that the Persians came from, and it was correct, wasn't it? Prophesied the direction the Greeks came from, and it's correct. Of course, it would be, wouldn't it? It's prophesied with and then it says, let's see. Then the goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and instead of it, there came up four conspicuous horns toward the four winds of heaven. Anybody know what that's about? What happens if you break the horn? The person dies. Alexander died, right? 4 generals took over, right? That's correct. So that's how it reads, but it's interesting because, you know, you can read through that and you can see how it works and everything, but then you can go over to the facing page. Look at verse 18, and when he had spoken to me, he says, Gabriel was going to tell me the meaning of the vision. And when he had spoken to me, I fell into a deep sleep and my face to the ground, but he touched me and made me stand. He said, Behold, I will make known to you what shall be the latter end of the indignation, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. As for the ram that you saw with the 2 horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. Well, that's not real hard, because Persia's in power, right? And the goat is the king of Greece. And the great horn between his eyes is the first king. That's just full out prophecy right there. No one could guess that, right? So, I like that. Let's look also at Daniel 11. So, if that was Greece taking down Persia, and Daniel 11 is talking about Greece as well. Now, these 4 generals were named Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. 2 of those should sound familiar to us, right? Ptolemy and Seleucus. The other 2, not so much, because they don't really come into play when it comes to Palestine. But Cassander, they split up Alexander's kingdom. They got Greece, basically. And Lysimachus got Thrace and Asia Minor. So that's all north and northwest up into Europe. Seleucus got Syria and Babylon, and Ptolemy got Egypt. Okay, and where is Jerusalem? Right smack dab in the middle of that, right? Yes, it's the Daniel 11 is a prophecy about 350-year period during Persia's reign. And it's so detailed in its prophecies that skeptics have said that it had to have been written after the fact. There's just no way, but that's not the truth. It was written well before the fact, wasn't it? It talks about names, it talks about battles, it talks about political marriages. Do you ever remember hearing about Bernice marrying, what did she marry? Antiochus II, I think. Except she was killed. And it talks about that. It talks about betrayals, it talks about religious persecution. And the one that I wanted to look at is beginning in Daniel 11, verse 21. This is Antiochus IV. And through about verse 35, it's very specific about him. You go verse by verse, and you can follow along with a historical interpretation. And every verse it shows how it's fulfilled. But especially, let's look at verse 31. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. And the wise among the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by sword and flame, by captivity and plunder. When they stumble, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery. And some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made white until the time of the end, for it still waits the appointed time. This is talking about Antiochus IV Epiphanes, when he was ruling over Judea, okay, Israel. And the horrible things that he did to the people, the Jews, while they were there. There's one line in there that should stand out that Jesus quotes and uses when he's talking about something else. You know what it is? They shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. He uses the same phrase when he's talking about what's going to happen to the temple in Jerusalem AD 70. So, thought question. Why silence? Why not? Why did God decide there would be no prophets for 400 years? Is he punishing Israel? Interesting question, isn't it? If you think about it, they're kind of in the same situation that we're in now, right? They had the word, and it was finished. It's completely done. They got the whole thing. 39, 37, 39. And it's like us today. We've got the whole Bible. And so, one of the first obvious reasons is that the Old Testament is completed. God has nothing to add to it. He's done. He's done writing it. That's all he meant to write. He's through. And now Israel is going to wait for what? Galatians 4. Somebody read verses 1 through 4 for us. Go ahead, Tom.
Now I see that the heir, as long as he is a child, is not different at all from a slave, though he is master of all. But is under guardians and stewards until the time appointed by the Father. Even so we, when we were children, were in bondage under the elements of the world. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those that are under the law.
Okay. So, we're waiting for the fullness of time. And you've heard this verse explained before, right? Put it in your own words. What does that line mean? The fullness of time, or the times.
God determined to complete his scheme of redeeming man with his Son from birth.
Right? And making the preparations for the time when it would be most beneficial for him to come. But because if he came at the wrong time, it wouldn't be right. Okay? And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Also, the reason it's silent, could be possibly, just an opinion, is it served as a transition to the Messianic age. Okay? It's like we were just talking about. They had the Word, they had the law and the prophets with them through these 400 years. And now we're transitioning to the Messianic age. Somebody read Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. One and 2, yes.
God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in time past to the fathers by the prophets, he has in these last days spoken to us by his Son, whom he has appointed heir of all things, and through whom also he made worlds.
So what is right in the middle of that verse?
That's
The 400 years of silence. It's right there in the middle of that verse. God had spoken in times past to the fathers by the prophets, and last one was Malachi, and that's when he finished. And in these days, he speaks to us now by his Son.
I think the religious leaders of the day, they weren't accepting of it. You can imagine when John the Baptist, as Elijah came out of the wilderness, and here was again in the beginning, here's a new prophet, counted him as a prophet, understood him to be a prophet. That this was that beginning of time, especially since he was the herald of Christ. He was stating, the one that comes after me, he's the one. indicating that, okay, now this is that time that has been prophesied and spoken of in the past, and they have been waiting for generations to come.
They have. A very good point. So, he's completed the Old Testament. He has no more prophecies to reveal. If you think about it, during this time of waiting, would continuous prophecy kind of mess things up a little bit? Do you see how that would kind of interfere? Possibly. A third possibility why there were silence is because it was a test of faithfulness. To see how the children of Israel would do. Someone turn to Galatians 3 for me. And let's read verses 23 through 25.
Before faith came, we were kept under guard by the law, kept for the faith which would afterward be revealed. Therefore, the law was our tutor to bring us to Christ, that we might be justified by faith. But after faith has come, we are no longer under a tutor.
Okay. Who was Paul talking to and about? He's talking to Jews and Gentiles, right? But what he's talking about is what we're talking about tonight, correct? And the tutor that he's talking about is not the instructor, it's the babysitter, so to speak. It's the one that takes you to class, make sure you get there. The one to make sure that you got your lunch ready and you're taking it along. So it's like the law and the prophets are conducting the children of Israel through this period of silence. Okay? And they're going to demonstrate their faith. They're not so good at it to begin with, but they will later, sure. And then finally, and we touched on this just now, all these years of silence created a spiritual hunger and longing for God's voice. And we can see that, can't we? How that can be. Because they were usually, even if they didn't get to experience very much of it, just a couple of prophets possibly at the end, but they knew the history of their nation and how many prophets had come during that time. And now they're waiting anxiously for prophecy to return. Okay? It was as if anticipation built right up to the appearance of John the Baptist. And how do we know that? But that was the case. How do we know that they were anticipating it? That there was a feeling, it seems like in Israel, that something's going to happen just any time. How is it demonstrated? We're going to talk a little bit later about why they were feeling that way, but how is it demonstrated? How can you prove that that's the case? What does John 1:21 say? Someone went to John and asked a question. We just read the prophecy in that. We just read the prophecy at the beginning of class, didn't we? They knew that prophecy, didn't they?
Ask him if he is the Messiah.
No. Not the Messiah. Asked me, are you Elijah? Because they knew what Malachi prophesied, right? The Elijah would come. And I asked him, are you Elijah? But then the one at the well, when she went to tell her family what had happened, what did she say? John 4:29, do y'all remember? Yeah, could this be the Christ? So I think everybody's looking for it. They're looking for the Messiah, especially because of the things that they had just come through. Okay? Anybody got any thoughts or comments? We got time.
It is interesting that none of it was completely from the time of Christ's birth, or well, really the birth of the conception of John the Baptist. It wasn't completely unknown because of Zacharias being struck dumb and prophesying. And then we have Jesus Christ being born of a virgin, and the wise men from the east coming, and all happened in Bethlehem, and those kinds of things. Not all would know about it, but things were changing. Some were probably aware of those things.
Yeah, these were things that weren't done in open, not in the open, so. Exactly, a little more private. Yeah. This is really not the time to talk about it, but that beautiful scene that those shepherds saw out in the fields that night, did anybody else see that? It was just for them. It was meant for them. Did anybody else saw it? There were a lot of angels in the sky. A lot of people should have seen it. There should have been a lot of talking about it the next day. So it was just for them. So they could go and meet Jesus. Okay. We're going to talk about, in our class, 4 main events that occurred during this period of time that contribute to the fullness of time that we read about in Galatians 4:4. There's some things, there's actually a lot of things, but there's 4 main things that we're going to talk about that was important to make things ready for Jesus to come as the Messiah. And the first one is Alexander the Great conquering the known world. That was a pretty big deal. 13 or 14 days to do what he did. It's incredible. I don't know how he covered the ground that fast. But it was very fast. But what was it that he did that was so important? And you wouldn't think about it off the top of your head. But he did something that was very important to the spread of the gospel.
Basically, the catalyst to a common language.
Absolutely. That's probably the most important thing that he did. He made it a point to Hellenize the world. He wanted Greek culture, the Greek language. He talked to everybody. You know, when we study the Old Testament, we don't think about the Greeks, do we? We don't think about the Greeks until when? We get to the end of the book. We get to the end of the Old Testament. The Greeks have been around for a long time. You've heard of the Odyssey and the Iliad, right? Who wrote it? Homer. You know who Homer was alive with in the Old Testament? Would you believe Samuel? That goes way back. So, yeah, Greece has been around a long time. The problem with Greece, though, was what? There were a bunch of city-states. And each city-state had its own little king, right? And they would fight each other just as much as anybody else. And they really couldn't defend themselves. But someone got them to become a nation. And he wasn't even a Greek. The rest of the Greeks didn't really care for him much. His name was Philip of Macedon. He was up in the north part of what will now be, the country of Greece. And he got all these city-states to come together. It's his son, Alexander the Great, right? And guess who taught Alexander how to read Greek? Can you think of another famous Greek philosopher? Close. Try again. Yes. He learned to read Attic Greek from Aristotle himself. Okay. So in 334 BC, he made Greek the language of his empire. Yeah, so it was. By the 1st century, it is so common that everyone could speak it in some form or another. It's a prevalent. For some, it wasn't their primary language at all. Like for the Jews living in Palestine, what was their primary language? Aramaic, right?
Maybe you might be about to say what I was going to say.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask, if I remember correctly, like Greek became the language of trade, basically. That's why so many people knew it.
Yes.
I mean, there's even, now, Jews that believe it or not believe, but there's you ever heard of the Ten Commandments stone out in Arizona, I think it is, in the desert, and people say it's not real, or whatever, but some of the, I guess, inscriptions on there are congruent with what would have been not perfect Greek, but like an altered Greek that was used by a different type of like sailor or something from another country. There's maybe some Greeks. But anyway, the main point was it was the language of trade, and that's why so many people from so many countries knew it, or Koine Greek, I think, was the basic.
Yes.
Correct.
That's common. And Aramaic, the way it came about, the Jews learned Greek, the ones who moved to Egypt. And that's where they learned. And after the Seleucid Empire came down into Jerusalem, they left because they were terrible. They moved down to Egypt because that's where Ptolemy was. And they actually had civic rights. The Jews did in Egypt. There was Alexandria, and that's where they learned the Greek. But there was a saying that I read was that you spoke Aramaic at home, you spoke Greek in the marketplace. And that's what Josh was saying. So yeah. So Greek, you can't underestimate the importance of Greek. Why? What happened in Alexandria that's very important? Septuagint. Ptolemy II, not the first, but Ptolemy II. He had all these Jews, and guess what? They couldn't read Hebrew anymore. They got the Hebrew Bibles and they can't read it. So he said, I want this translated into Greek so they'll have a Bible. And 72 scholars got together and they figured this out and they translated it. And they even added some apocryphal writings of the Jews in there as well. And by 100 BC is when it was finished. Israel had a complete version of their Bible in circulation on a language other than Hebrew. It was the very first translation. And who could read it? Everybody. Yes. You think that was God's doing? Absolutely. I do. God had a part in that. Another saying I saw Rome conquered Greece militarily, but Greece conquered Rome culturally. Because even after Rome defeated them, no one spoke Latin. No one but the uppity-ups and the elite in Rome would speak Latin. So that was the first main event, very important. I think that's good along. The second main event, well, we covered that one too just now. That was the Septuagint. Okay? Yes. It was very similar, in fact. It wasn't Koine Greek because it was earlier, but it was very similar enough to Koine Greek that you could read it. It's very important because it contributed to the spread of the gospel. Right? Okay. The third important event, you wouldn't think so, was the Maccabean Revolt. Why would that be so important to preparing the children of Israel for the coming of the Messiah? Somebody tell me the history around the Maccabean Revolt. Does anybody recall any of the details? Well, it was the Seleucids. The Seleucid Ptolemies, they were constantly going back and forth. When we look at Daniel 11, that was like 200-year period. They're constantly battling each other for control of Israel. Okay. And Antiochus, the fourth Epiphanes, he managed to grab control of the country while after his brother died. After his brother died, and the other brother was in prison in a foreign country. And what he did is he got mad at the Jews, and he went and commanded them that they could no longer practice their Jewish religion. They couldn't circumcise their children. Mothers circumcised their sons anyway. He killed them all. He killed the mother and the child. They couldn't keep the Sabbath. They couldn't read the Torah. Couldn't do any of that. He put an altar to Zeus in the temple. But that wasn't the worst thing. That's not the abomination of desolation that we're reading about. Do you remember what that was? Sacrifice swine on Yahweh's altar. And that was horrible. That was absolutely horrible. They tried to get Judas Mattathias, you know this Judas Maccabeus, to offer a swine on the altar. He's a priest. He only has Hasmonean family of priests. And he refused. Another man says, I'll do it. He said, no, you won't. He killed him. He killed his fellow countryman, and he killed the man that came to try to tell him to do it. And then he called for arms. And his son, Judas Maccabeus, was the one that actually led the revolt. Okay. Well, what happened out of all that is that Israel won its independence for 80 years. Up until the time that Rome took over in about 63 BC. 80 years. That doesn't sound like long living. Some of us from that over. We'll look at that. But it was long enough. And it was very, very important for the nation. It resulted in a zealous national and religious identification. It included the restoration and rededication of the temple. What they had done was horrible, and it had to be completely, you have to get Caroline to come clean it, right? And it had to be rededicated, and the rededication led to probably the only Jewish feast that's been practiced continuously from that time to this time. Do you know what it is? Hanukkah, Feast of Dedication. So we got all the Feast of Lights. Came from that. It's deep in the Messianic expectation. Judas Maccabeus is the model of deliverance. Jude's Messiah expectations. It also caused the six. Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Zealots all came out of that period of independence, set the stage for the arrival of Jesus. The last thing we want to take long is real quick. But it's important too. How does Paul get to wherever he's going? He's doing all his missionary journeys.
Either by ship or by foot.
By foot. He walks all the while. What did he walk on? Roman roads. Yes. Romans built the Appian Way in 300 BC. That's the famous Appian Way. Rome down to Port Athens, I think is where it goes. Yes, 300 BC. By 1 AD, they had 29 main roads out of Rome, 370 roads connecting all of the empire. That's 250,000 miles of roads built by hand. 80,000 of them were paved with rocks. That's incredible. But because of that, it helped spread the gospel throughout the empire in less than 70 years. Mostly by water. And then Roman peace enabled free travel also throughout. You might have heard of this Pax Romana. And that set them up. They were ready for John the Baptist to make his appearance. They were looking for it. Thank you very much, y'all.